Welcome to Elevation. Today I'm going to explore the topic of self-care. Self-care is taking care of yourself to be the best version of yourself. A lot of people think self-care is just taking time out for yourself or doing something nice for yourself. Things like retail therapy, vacations, etc. But it goes much, did I say much? More deeper than that. I used to be one of those people, that's why I can speak on this. I would go on these vacations, go shopping, etc. And those things made me feel better for a little while, but then a few days later, this feeling of something just not being right, but I couldn't put my finger on it, would come back. So for me to figure out what was going on and why I kept having these feelings, I started down the path of spirituality. Spirituality was good for me because it made me examine parts of myself that I hadn't really examined before. Trying to be the best me that I could possibly be, I realized that a lot of my decisions have been based on a low self-worth. People with low self-worth don't give themselves the same respect and understanding that they expect from themselves. I usually, would give people way more chances than they needed to, and they wouldn't be giving me the same energy back, but I was so busy trying to prove to them that, I had them, I wasn't really realizing that they weren't giving me that same energy. And that's the thing that most people with low self-respect do. They're very hard on themselves. They don't give themselves the same respect and understanding that they give other people. I felt like I didn't have a problem because I felt like self-esteem was your looks. Like, I didn't have a problem with how I looked on the outside or felt down about that, and I felt pretty confident in that area, so I thought I was good. But digging deep down, I saw that I had this bigger issue. I was letting the circumstances in my life during that time determine my self-worth. Self-worth isn't what you have or what the things that you accomplished. No matter what you've done or you haven't done, you still deserve the same respect and loyalty as everyone else. Just because your peers around you have done more than you, it doesn't mean that they deserve any more respect or understanding either. I mean, you just have to treat all people the same. It's not like you have to, treat certain people certain ways based on other things and things like that. And you can't let what the judgments of other people have against you determine your self-worth either, because sometimes we do that. We let what people say get to us, and we feel like maybe they're right, maybe it's the issue with us. That's not true. People's judgments don't determine you. That's what you're reflecting in of themselves that they haven't accepted yet. People with low self-worth tend to not push themselves as hard to get things done. They procrastinate and let important things slide. They usually engage in risky behaviors also. During the time that I began my journey, I was doing all of those things. I would make excuses why something wouldn't work without even trying it, or because it was hard, I would often not complete whatever I sought out to do. I would feel like when things didn't work out, it was a sign that I wasn't supposed to do it anyway, and I would just use that as an excuse to quit. By examining the issues, I realized that I had this pattern of repeating similar situations over again. I was going through the same situations with different people in different places, etc. So once I broke that cycle, I developed a higher self-worth. I was able to forgive myself for my past mistakes and move forward. I set boundaries with people, which was something that was very hard for me. Like I had said earlier, I was hard on myself for mistakes, and it had me feeling down because I knew that some of these choices were why I was in the position I was in. But you can't change something that's already happened. You have to learn from it and move on. And that's what I did. I took accountability and I moved on, and I moved to a more positive future. I would have never written a book, probably even started this podcast, if I was still feeling the same way that I was feeling about myself before. because I often sold myself short when I shouldn't have. Through self-care, I realized that I could only love and help others to the extent that they were willing to help themselves. That was a big problem for me, was people were constantly emotionally dumping on me. Like, they would come and they would tell me their issues and their problems, and I would spend all this time trying to help them and stuff. And, I think a lot of that was so I didn't have to deal with what I had going on. It was easier to help them than to focus on my own issues. Just like sometimes it's easier to give advice than take your own advice. But it got really, really draining. Like, it was just sucking all my energy. And, I was tired being an empath. And an empath is a person, that feels a person's emotions. That made it that much worse because, I would be taking on this energy from these other people, and sometimes I would be feeling things that were them that wasn't even me. And I really had to stop myself from doing these things. So when I finally learned to put myself first, and that was okay, then things really started to change. And the people in my life that were supposed to be there accepted my boundaries, and the people that didn't, well, they're not in my life anymore. You have to realize that it's okay to cut people off. I don't care if it's family or whatever. If it's toxic to you and it's not conducive to your growth, then you deal with them from a distance. You don't have to let anybody in, and you don't have to do anything for anybody that you don't want to do. Don't let people make you feel bad for saying no, because that's just them trying to push your boundary to get you to do what they want you to do. So just remember that, going forth. One of the things that really, really helped me examine myself was examining my shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves that we reject or suppress. For example, you could be a really, really emotional person, and people say, you shouldn't show your emotions. That's a sign of weakness. And then you tend to now hold yourself back. You don't really show your emotions. It's hard for you to be vulnerable because you've been made to feel like showing vulnerability is something wrong, when in fact it's not something wrong. We have to show compassion and things, things like of that nature. But, everybody wants to be savage, we don't have feelings and, all those things. And that's not the way to go about things, because sooner or later, all that is going to come to a head and you're just going to just be in overload. So that's why it's important for you to embrace the positive parts of yourself as well as the negative parts of yourself. You look at the negative parts of yourself, you accept them for what they are, and you work on them. I'm not saying that, you don't work on these toxic things, because there are some people that are like, well, this is just the way I am, so, just take me how I am. And that's not the way to be either. Just because you've accepted your faults or your toxicity doesn't mean other people have to. And to be able to deal with other people and for the betterment of yourself, because you're really holding yourself back, holding on to these things and not working on them because it's hard and just saying that's how it is, you're holding yourself back too. Nobody is perfect, and telling yourself that you aren't allowed to have certain feelings, that's really just detrimental to your growth. You're not going to go anywhere. You have to really look at yourself, the light and the dark. There's not, you can't be one all the time. Nobody's happy all the time. If you're happy all the time, you're lying to yourself. Let's be real. Like, you just don't want to accept that, you're having unhappy feelings. It's not that you have to dwell on those feelings or anything like that, but you have to unpack them and figure out why you feel that way, and then you can move on from that. Back to the shadow. Most of the time, the shadow develops in childhood. It comes from things that weren't accepted in childhood, and it goes over into adulthood. Questions that I asked myself to examine my shadow were, Did I feel completely accepted as a child? How did I feel most of the time as a child? What behaviors or emotions during my childhood got me into trouble or judged by other people? Digging into those questions, I figured out that often there was things that I didn't receive as a child, and those feelings led me to overcompensate in certain areas in adulthood, which is why I gave people, certain passes when I shouldn't, and I overextended myself a lot of times in certain areas that maybe I should have pulled back from had I not had all this other internal things going on. And also explain why I had a problem with being vulnerable and living unapologetically. I spent a large part of my life trying to live this life I thought I was supposed to have, because we're told all these things we're supposed to do and all these things that we're supposed to have by a certain age, and that's what I was trying to do, but I wasn't happy. I was just going through the motions of life, and I needed a change. And once I started unpacking all these things and admitting all these things to myself that I really didn't want to, I'm going to be honest, it's hard. Like, it's not easy to go and do this. Some people need professional help. There's nothing wrong with going to therapy. Talking to friends is fine, but you need someone that's going to make you be real with yourself. And a lot of times, friends will tell you what you want to hear. That's just the truth of it, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. So don't be afraid to seek professional help to get you through this if that's what you need to do, because you need to be your best possible self in order to be happy. There's no other way around it. As long as you're playing with your potential, you're gonna go through these phases where you're gonna have periods where you're feeling down. Even when you're vibing at a higher level, sometimes you still feel down, because life gets harder. The more aware you are of yourself, the more things you notice that you didn't notice before. And sometimes it does make you feel a certain type of way. But because you're so in tune with yourself, you understand that you have to let people live their life their way, and that's their path to take. And you look at what triggered you by whatever they did and figure out, what it inside you still need to work on. That's how I go about it. Also, you have to pay, like I was saying, you have to pay close attention to your triggers. Triggers are your subconscious's way of trying to make you aware of issues that you have suppressed. It isn't other people's job to not trigger you. It's not their fault that you haven't healed these emotional wounds that still linger around. Steps that I would suggest in your self-care journey that helped me, first of all, is setting boundaries. It's important to put yourself first, because as the saying goes, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to learn to enjoy your own company. It's a difference between being alone and actually enjoying being alone. We often depend on others more than we think to make us feel better. When we take time with ourselves, we actually learn the things that truly make us happy, that aren't dependent on what other people do to us or for us, or the energy we get from just being around those certain people. I'm not saying you have to isolate yourself, but I'm saying that you need to know the difference between being around people because they add something to your life and needing to be around people because you just can't handle being by yourself. And another thing is that I can't stress more than enough, you have to step out of your comfort zone. You never know what you can do if you don't try. Like I was saying before, I feel like a lot of depression and things like that stem from you living this life you think you're supposed to be leading instead of the one you actually want. Go for it. Just go out there and go for it. Yeah, things can go wrong, but things can go right too, and you won't never know as long as you keep talking yourself out of things. So that's another thing that I really think is important, and elevating yourself to a higher level. And staying motivated through this process sometimes gets hard because you have so many things you want to accomplish, and you haven't gotten there yet. And one of the ways that helped me stay motivated was to write down a list of my accomplishments. Reminding yourself of the good things you've done will help you stop dwelling on the negative. Also, having a vision board helps. A vision board is nothing but a visual representation of your goals. Looking at what you want to do helps you stay motivated to what you're going to do. Also, I found breaking goals down into smaller steps helped me because I wouldn't get so overwhelmed, and checking off each piece helped me see that I was making progress even though I hadn't completed the entire goal. Small steps are just important as large steps, and sometimes we forget that. Well, I know I do, because I'm so focused on what I want to do and getting there that I don't see that I've done all these things, and I look past it sometimes. So make sure that and celebrate those small accomplishments too, because everything you do is getting you one step closer to where you're trying to be. The last thing that I would say would be, you have to learn to trust yourself. Sometimes we overthink and we talk ourselves out of things that we should do or we could be doing. And if you don't trust yourself, then how can you trust anybody else? You have to build that trust up. That's the last thing that I'm going to talk about, and I want to let you ponder on that until the next episode. I would love your feedback and to hear about any topics that you would like to hear me discuss on future shows. You can private message me on any of my social media. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Yvette_author, and on Facebook at Yvette author, altogether, no spaces. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, ciao.